Caleb Turner didn't go to the auction to buy a horse. He went because staying home felt heavier than the cold wind cutting across the plains. That morning had started like most others on his ranch, with a list of problems longer than daylight. A fence post leaning the wrong way. A water pump making a sound it shouldn't. Bills stacked on the kitchen table, their corners curled like they were tired of waiting. Caleb stood at the sink longer than necessary, staring out at land that once felt like a promise and now felt like a burden he carried alone. The ranch used to be loud, not with people, but with purpose. Now it was quiet in a way that made thoughts echo. Someone at the feed store had mentioned the auction in passing, said it might be good to get out, said there'd be coffee, noise, familiar faces. Caleb didn't argue. Arguing meant admitting things were wrong. He pulled on his old jacket, the one with the torn cuff, and drove toward town under a sky so wide it made a man feel small whether he wanted to or not. The auction yard smelled like dust and metal and old habits. Pickup trucks lined the fence, engines ticking as they cooled. Men gathered in small knots, hands wrapped around coffee cups, eyes trained to calculate value in seconds. This wasn't a place for sentiment. Animals here were numbers, weight, muscle, resale. Caleb stayed near the back like he always did. He watched calves move through the ring, some selling fast, others met with silence that felt almost cruel. The auctioneer's voice rose and fell in practiced rhythm, a sound that blended into the background like wind through wire. Caleb wasn't really watching. His mind drifted to winter feed costs, diesel prices, the way the wind had sounded sharper lately, almost impatient. Then he heard the laughter. It wasn't loud at first, just a ripple, a few surprised chuckles, a shake of heads. Caleb looked up. What came through the gate barely registered as a horse to the men closest to the ring. Too small, too thin, its coat dull, its legs trembling as if they weren't convinced they belonged to the body carrying them. The handler tugged gently on the lead, trying to guide it forward, but the filly hesitated, blinking against the noise and dust. Someone muttered, "What's that thing?" Another voice followed, "Should have put it down already." The laughter grew. The auctioneer tried to move things along, but the bids didn't come. Not even low ones. No hands raised, no interest, just impatience. The filly shifted its weight, ribs visible with every breath, ears flicking back and forth like it was searching for something familiar in a place that offered nothing. Caleb felt something tighten in his chest. He didn't know why. He told himself it was nothing. He didn't need another mouth to feed. He could barely keep up with the ones he had. Buying anything today would be irresponsible. He had come only to watch, only to pass time, only to forget his own problems for an hour. But the way the filly stood there, shaking, unwanted, already written off, felt uncomfortably familiar. The auctioneer called out a starting price. No response. Lowered it. Still nothing. The crowd's attention drifted away. Someone coughed. Someone else checked their phone. The filly might as well have been invisible. That was when Caleb's hand moved. He didn't plan it. Didn't think it through. $1. A gesture so small it almost felt like a mistake even as he made it. A few heads turned, surprised more than amused. The auctioneer paused, squinting toward the back. "Got $1, he said, unsure. No one challenged it. The gavel came down with a crack that echoed louder than it should have. Sold. Just like that, it was over. The men around Caleb went back to their conversations. The auction moved on. Another animal entered the ring. Another set of numbers. Another calculation. But Caleb stood frozen. Because as the handler led the filly toward him, its dark eyes lifted for a moment and met his. There was no gratitude there. No understanding. Just exhaustion. And something else he couldn't name. Caleb swallowed. He didn't know it yet, but that $1 decision had just placed him on a path no one in that yard could have imagined. Least of all him. and the real cost of that choice hadn't even begun to show itself. Caleb realized the mistake halfway to the truck. That was the first honest thought he'd had since the gavel fell. The filly followed him slowly, hooves light against the dirt, stopping every few steps as if checking whether this strange new direction was real. Caleb kept his hand low on the lead, not pulling, not rushing. He didn't know why he was being careful. Maybe because the animal looked like it would break if he wasn't. Men watched him pass. Some shook their heads. One laughed outright. "Should have saved $1," someone called out. Caleb didn't respond. He opened the tailgate, hesitated, then lowered the ramp he used for calves. The filly sniffed the metal, flinched at a sudden clang from the yard, then stepped up with effort that seemed too big for its frame. Every movement looked borrowed, like it was spending energy it didn't have. As he closed the gate, doubt finally caught up with him. What had he done? He hadn't planned for this. He didn't have spare feed. He didn't have time. He didn't have money for a vet, especially not for an animal that looked like it had already lost its argument with life. This wasn't kindness. This was recklessness. That was the word that settled heavy in his chest as he climbed into the truck. The drive home felt longer than usual. The plains stretched out on both sides, empty and unforgiving. Wind pushed against the truck, rattling something loose under the hood. Caleb drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting uselessly on his leg, his thoughts running circles he couldn't break. He told himself he could always resell the filly. Someone might take it for parts. That thought made his stomach turn. When he pulled into the ranch, the sun was already dropping, staining the sky with muted orange and gray. He backed the trailer toward the small paddock near the barn, the one he hadn't used in months. The filly hesitated again at the ramp, muscles trembling, breath shallow. "Easy," Caleb murmured, surprised at the sound of his own voice. The word didn't matter. His tone did. She stepped down slowly, then stood still, head low, as if waiting for something else to go wrong. Caleb cut the lead and watched her for a long moment. She didn't explore, didn't trot, didn't test the fence. She just stood there, sides rising and falling, eyes dull with fatigue. Up close, the truth was impossible to ignore. Old scars, a slight hitch in one hind leg, hooves worn unevenly, signs of neglect layered over exhaustion. "This is bad," Caleb whispered. That night, he didn't sleep. Every sound outside pulled him awake. Wind against the barn. A coyote calling from too close for comfort. He lay staring at the ceiling, replaying the auction, the laughter, the way his hand had lifted on instinct instead of sense. By morning, the decision had already taken root, heavy and unavoidable. If he'd brought the filly home, he was responsible. At first light, Caleb was back on his feet. He mixed feed carefully, stretching what he had. The filly approached the trough slowly, sniffed, then ate like she wasn't sure the food would stay. Caleb leaned against the fence, arms crossed, watching every bite, every shift of weight. That's when he noticed it. The way she moved, even weak, even thin, there was something off about her stride. Not wrong, just different. Her front legs reached farther than expected. Her balance corrected itself faster than it should have. It was subtle, easy to dismiss. Caleb almost did. Almost. Instead, he fetched an old halter and led her into the open stretch behind the barn. He didn't push her, just walked, then jogged a few steps. The filly followed, awkward but willing. When she stumbled, she recovered quicker than any animal her size had a right to. Caleb's heart thudded once, hard. "Again," he muttered more to himself than to her. He tried once more. A longer stretch, a bit more pace. The filly's breathing quickened, but her legs stayed straight, smooth, efficient in a way that made Caleb stop short. He stood there, chest tight, staring at an idea he didn't want to believe, because believing it meant risk. and risk was something the ranch had already taken too much from him. Still, as the filly lowered her head and breathed in short bursts, Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't bought a mistake. He'd bought a question, and the answer, whatever it was going to cost him more than $1. Caleb told himself to slow down. Hope had a way of sounding smart right before it ruined a man. For the next few days he did everything by the book, by his book at least. Short walks at dawn, measured feed, clean water, no pushing, no dreaming. He watched from the fence the way he always had, hands tucked under his arms, jaw set like he was bracing against weather. The filly, he started calling her Slate in his head, though he never said it out loud, moved with a cautious rhythm, conserving energy, learning the land one step at a time. Word travels fast in ranch country. By the third morning, a pickup slowed near the gate, then another the next day. Men leaned out of windows, eyes curious, voices casual in that way that wasn't casual at all. "Thought you bought junk," one said. Caleb shrugged. "Still might have." They laughed and drove on, satisfied. Caleb stayed quiet. Silence had become a tool. If he didn't say it, maybe it wouldn't grow legs and run away with him. On the fourth day, the vet came. Caleb hadn't planned on it. He'd called late, half expecting the answer machine. The vet answered anyway. An older man. Knew the ranch, knew the numbers didn't work. He arrived in the afternoon with dust on his boots and a look that said he was already braced for bad news. They worked in the small pen by the barn. The filly stood patiently while hands checked joints, listened to breathing, lifted hooves. The vet's face stayed neutral, professional, unreadable. Caleb hated that face. "Well?" Caleb asked finally. The vet wiped his hands. "She's underweight, malnourished. That leg's been compensating for a while." Caleb nodded. None of that surprised him. "But," the vet added, pausing just long enough to make the word matter, "the structure's there. Bone density's better than it looks. Heart's strong." Caleb's chest tightened. The vet tilted his head, studying the filly as she shifted her stance. "Where'd you get her?" "Auction." "For how much?" Caleb hesitated. $1. That earned a look. Not laughter, not pity, something closer to curiosity. "She's not fast now," the vet said carefully. "Might never be. But she's not broken. Not the way people thought?" The words landed heavier than they should have. That night, Caleb sat at the kitchen table with a notebook he hadn't opened in years. He ran numbers he knew wouldn't add up. Feed costs, vet follow-ups, time, opportunity cost. Every line ended the same way. Loss. He closed the notebook and stared at the wall until the light faded. The next morning, he did something he hadn't done since he was younger and braver. He let Slate run. Not far, not fast, just enough to see. He clucked softly, stepped back, gave her space. For a second, nothing happened. Then Slate lifted her head and moved, not stumbling, not scrambling, but flowing forward in a way that didn't match her size. Caleb stopped breathing. It wasn't speed. Not yet. It was balance, efficiency, the way her body aligned when she found a rhythm. She covered ground without wasting motion, like she'd been designed to do exactly this and nothing else. She ran maybe 50 yards and stopped, sides heaving, eyes bright with effort. Caleb laughed once, sharp and disbelieving, then pressed his hand to his mouth like the sound might escape and bring the world crashing down on him. That afternoon, a stranger pulled up to the gate. Clean truck, out-of-state plates. He leaned against the door, arms crossed, eyes sharp in a way Caleb recognized immediately. "You the guy who bought that filly?" the man asked. Caleb felt the ranch go quiet around him. "Who's asking?" The man smiled, just enough. "Someone who's seen a lot of horses people gave up on." Caleb's instincts screamed. He stepped between the fence and the pen without thinking. "She's not for sale." The man raised his hand slightly amused. Didn't say she was, just curious. Curiosity was dangerous. Caleb knew that now, because if one man had noticed, others would follow. And whatever Slate truly was, whatever that strange, efficient movement meant, it was no longer just Caleb's secret to discover. It was a clock that had started ticking. Caleb didn't sleep that night either, but this time it wasn't worry that kept him awake. It was calculation. By morning, the ranch felt different. Not louder, not brighter, sharper, like every sound carried meaning now. The stranger's words replayed in his head with uncomfortable clarity. Someone who's seen a lot of horses people gave up on. That wasn't curiosity. That was confirmation. Caleb changed his routine. No more open runs behind the barn. No more letting Slate move where anyone could see. He shifted her to the far paddock, the one shielded by cottonwoods and old fencing that hadn't been straight since his father's time. If opportunity was circling, he wasn't going to leave the door wide open. Still, the feeling wouldn't leave him. Slate responded to structure faster than he expected. Within days, her coat began to lose its dullness. She ate with confidence now, head low, ears relaxed. Her steps grew steadier, her breathing stronger. Caleb worked with her in silence, listening more than directing. He'd learned long ago that animals told the truth if you didn't interrupt them. That's when he noticed the second thing. Recovery time. Slate didn't just move well, she recovered fast. After short bursts, her breathing normalized quicker than any filly her size should have managed. Her muscles didn't lock. Her focus didn't scatter. It was as if her body knew exactly how hard it could go without crossing a line. That kind of efficiency wasn't taught. It was built. Caleb made another call he couldn't afford. A trainer this time. An old acquaintance who'd left ranch work years ago to train for small circuits. Nothing famous, nothing glamorous. The man arrived late in the afternoon, sun low behind him, eyes already assessing before a word was spoken. They watched Slate move. Once. Twice. The trainer didn't smile. He didn't speak at first, either. "Where did you get her?" he finally asked. Caleb didn't answer right away. He didn't know why, but something in the man's tone told him honesty had a price. "Wyoming auction," he said at last. The trainer exhaled slowly. "That tracks." Caleb frowned. "Tracks how?" "Because no one looks twice at horses like this anymore," the trainer said. "They want size, flash, pedigree on paper. They don't look for efficiency. They don't look for stride economy." Caleb felt the words settle into place. "What are you saying?" he asked. The trainer turned to him. "I'm saying you need to decide what you want before someone else does." That night, Caleb sat alone in the barn long after the light should have been turned off. Slate stood quietly nearby, chewing, unaware of the storm forming around her. Caleb ran his hand along the rough wood of the stall and thought about his father, about the way the ranch used to feel when belief still outweighed fear. He had two options: protect Slate by keeping her hidden and safe, or risk everything by letting her be seen. Both came with consequences. The first offer came sooner than he expected. A man showed up unannounced 2 days later. Different truck, different tone, same sharp eyes. He didn't ask questions. He made statements. "She's worth more than you paid," the man said, leaning on the fence. Caleb said nothing. "I'll give you $5,000, the man continued. "Right now, no paperwork hassle." $5,000 would erase a month of worry, maybe more. Caleb's jaw tightened. "No," he said. The man blinked, surprised. "You sure?" Caleb met his gaze. "I am." The man nodded slowly. "Then someone else will ask, and they won't all be polite." As the truck disappeared down the road, Caleb realized something that sent a chill through him. The ranch wasn't just quiet anymore. It was being watched, and Slate, his $1 mistake, had become a target. Caleb learned quickly that saying no was louder than saying yes. After the $5,000 offer, the road outside the ranch stopped being empty. Trucks slowed. Dust lingered longer than it should have. Men leaned on fences without introductions, eyes tracking Slate's movement even when she was barely visible through the trees. No one said the word race, but everyone thought it. Caleb tightened everything. Gates stayed locked. Training happened at dawn and after dusk. He worked Slate in short, controlled intervals, building strength without spectacle. He documented everything in the old notebook: heart rate, recovery time, stride length measured by fence posts and shadows. It felt obsessive. It felt necessary. The trainer returned, unannounced this time. "I heard someone offered you money," the trainer said, skipping pleasantries. Caleb didn't deny it. "You're sitting on something rare," the trainer continued. "Not fast yet, not finished, but rare doesn't stay hidden." Caleb stared out at the paddock. "I don't have money to take her where she needs to go." The trainer nodded. "That's why people like me exist." That was the first real risk. They trailered Slate to a small, forgotten dirt track 2 towns over. Nothing official, nothing impressive. The kind of place where stories started quietly. Only 3 other horses were there that morning. Bigger, cleaner, better pedigrees on paper. Caleb's stomach knotted. The trainer didn't push Slate. He placed her carefully. Watched the others run first. Studied how she reacted to noise, to movement, to pressure. When it was Slate's turn, Caleb stood at the rail with his hands clenched so tight his fingers went numb. "Don't watch the others," the trainer told him. "Watch her feet." Slate broke clean. Not explosive, not flashy, efficient. She didn't waste motion. She didn't drift. Her stride lengthened naturally, like it had been waiting for permission. By the halfway mark, she wasn't leading, but she wasn't losing ground either. Then, without drama, she passed one horse, then another. Caleb's breath caught. She finished second. Second didn't matter. What mattered was silence, the kind that followed when people recalculated. The trainer didn't smile. He just exhaled slowly. That, he said, was with no real conditioning. On the drive home, Caleb didn't speak. His mind raced faster than Slate ever had. He saw possibilities forming and collapsing at the same time. Training costs, transport, entry fees, risk, exposure. 2 days later, the offers doubled. 10,000, 15. One man hinted at more if Caleb was willing to move quickly and quietly. Caleb said no to all of them, because something else had started happening. Slate was changing, not just physically, mentally. She anticipated cues, adjusted pace on instinct, handled noise without panic. The trainer called it race sense. Caleb called it frightening. The first official entry nearly broke him. Paperwork, fees, liability. Standing in a line of people who didn't know him, didn't care about his ranch, didn't care how close he'd been to losing everything. Slate's name went onto a program no one noticed. Until she ran. The race was small, almost forgettable. Caleb stood near the back, heart hammering, knowing this was the moment where dreams usually died. Slate broke clean again, held pace. Then, on the final stretch, did something no one expected. She surged. Not wildly, not desperately, precisely. She crossed first by a length that felt unreal. There was no cheering at first, just confusion. Then phones came out. Caleb felt it before he heard it. The shift. The air changed. Conversation started behind hands. Someone said his name wrong, but said it anyway. The trainer leaned close. "You just erased every quiet path out." Caleb looked at Slate, steam rising from her coat, eyes clear and alert. That night, the biggest offer came yet. It wasn't shouted across a fence. It was delivered calmly, professionally, with paperwork and a timeline. A number so large Caleb had to read it twice to make sure he wasn't misplacing zeros. It would solve everything. Ranch, debt, future. All he had to do was sign. Caleb closed the folder. "Not yet," he said. The man across the table frowned. "You may not get another chance." Caleb nodded slowly. "I might not." As he walked back to the barn, he understood the truth he'd been avoiding. Slate wasn't just changing his finances. She was forcing him to choose who he was willing to become, and the next race would make that choice irreversible. The next race wasn't supposed to be big. That's what everyone kept saying. Just another step, the trainer called it. A proving ground, the officials said. But Caleb felt the weight of it the moment he woke up that morning, before his feet even touched the floor. This race wasn't about money anymore. It was about exposure, about crossing a line you couldn't step back over. They arrived before sunrise. The track lights cut through the fog like pale knives. Trailers lined up in neat rows, polished, branded, expensive. Slate's trailer looked out of place among them, like it had wandered in by accident. Caleb could feel the looks. Curious, dismissive, calculating. No one laughed anymore. That scared him more than the laughter ever had. In the paddock, Slate stood calm, ears flicking, muscles loose. She didn't know about offers or contracts or people watching her like an equation. She only knew the rhythm of work and release. Caleb rested his forehead briefly against her neck, breathing in the familiar scent of hay and dust. "This is it," he whispered, "whatever happens." The trainer adjusted the tack with careful hands. "Don't expect the same race," he warned. "They'll pressure her early." He was right. From the break, Slate was boxed in. Bigger horses leaned into her space, forcing her to shorten stride. Dirt kicked up, noise crashed around her, and for a heartbeat, Caleb felt panic spike through him. This was where fragile horses folded, where mistakes showed. Slate didn't fold. She adapted. She shifted her weight, found a narrow line, waited, actually waited, then slipped through an opening that shouldn't have been there. It wasn't raw speed that carried her forward. It was timing, intelligence, economy. By the final turn, she was still behind. Caleb's chest burned. Then Slate did something no one had trained her to do. She accelerated through contact. Not reckless, controlled. Her stride lengthened without losing balance, her head steady, her body aligned like it had rehearsed this moment long before Caleb ever raised his hand at the auction. She crossed the line first. Again. This time, there was no silence. The crowd reacted all at once, voices rising, hands pointing, phones recording. Names were asked. Notes were taken. People who hadn't noticed her before suddenly knew exactly what they were looking at. In the winner's circle, Caleb felt disconnected from his body like he was watching someone else stand there. A man in a clean jacket shook his hand and congratulated him, already glancing toward Slate with a different kind of interest. After the race, the offers stopped being casual. They became aggressive. Partnerships, buyouts, syndicates. Words Caleb had only heard on the radio were suddenly aimed directly at him. One man spoke softly about protecting the asset. Another mentioned timelines, schedules, international tracks. Slate wasn't a horse to them. She was leverage. That night, Caleb sat alone in the trailer, paperwork spread across the small table. One deal stood out. Life-changing money. Guaranteed. Immediate. He could sign and walk away before the world decided how much pressure to apply. He imagined the ranch without worry. The fences fixed. The bills gone. The quiet returning in a way that didn't hurt. Then he looked at Slate through the open door, standing calmly in the stall, eyes alert, waiting. Walking away felt wrong, not because of greed, because this wasn't finished. Caleb closed the folder again. The trainer watched him carefully. "You keep saying no," he said. "Eventually, you'll have to say yes to something." Caleb nodded. "I know." What he didn't say was the truth pressing against his ribs. The next race wasn't just going to raise the stakes, It was going to expose Slate to a level of scrutiny and pressure that would either break the illusion or turn that $1 filly into something no one could ignore. The final race didn't feel like a race. It felt like a verdict. By the time Caleb arrived, Slate's name was no longer a curiosity. It was a question everyone wanted answered. The track was larger this time, sharper, brighter, cameras everywhere. Men in tailored jackets spoke in quiet clusters, their attention never fully leaving the paddock. Caleb had never felt more out of place. He stayed close to Slate, grounding himself in routine, adjusting straps, checking hooves. The trainer spoke less than usual. There was nothing left to explain. This race wasn't about proving potential. It was about confirmation. The gates opened. From the first stride, the pressure was relentless. Slate was tested early, forced wide, crowded, challenged at every turn. Horses with deeper backing and louder reputations surged around her. This was where most stories ended. This was where fairy tales collapsed under weight. Caleb's hands shook. Then Slate settled. She didn't fight the chaos. She absorbed it, found her rhythm inside the noise. When the opening came, it wasn't dramatic. It was inevitable. She moved forward like gravity had finally chosen a direction. The final stretch felt unreal. Slate didn't just win. She separated, crossing the line clear, decisive, undeniable. The crowd erupted, not in surprise, but recognition. In that moment, Caleb understood something that hit harder than the applause. He hadn't rescued Slate. He'd recognized her. The offers that followed weren't shouted or rushed. They were formal, controlled, serious. One number stood above the rest. 7 figures. Clean. Immediate. No tricks. Caleb signed, not because he was done, but because the chapter had closed. The ranch was paid off, every fence repaired, every debt erased. Slate moved on to a life that matched what she'd always been capable of. Caleb stayed behind, standing in the same dust where the story had begun, hands in his pockets, watching the land breathe again. Months later, someone asked him if he'd known, if he'd seen it coming. Caleb shook his head. "No," he said. "I just knew when not to look away." Because sometimes a dollar isn't a gamble. It's a test, and passing it can change everything. The money hit Caleb's account on a Tuesday. Not with fireworks, not with celebration. Just a number sitting quietly on a screen that felt unreal every time he looked at it. 7 figures. Caleb stared at it longer than he should have, then closed the laptop like it might vanish if he didn't. He stepped outside instead. The ranch looked the same. Same fence lines, same dust, same wind pushing across the grass like it always had. That was the strangest part. Nothing looked different, but everything was. The first thing he paid was the debt he'd been carrying so long it felt like part of his spine. Loans, late fees, interest stacked on interest. He made the calls himself, one by one. Each confirmation felt lighter than the last. By the end of the day, the ranch was finally his again. No bank, no warnings, no countdown. He fixed the fence next. Not because he had to, but because he could. Replaced posts instead of patching them. Upgraded wire instead of tightening old strands. For the first time in years, his work wasn't reactive. It was deliberate. At night, the quiet returned. But this time, it didn't ache. News traveled fast after Slate's final race. Articles, interviews, mentions on sports radio. Caleb declined most of it. He wasn't interested in being a symbol. He wasn't interested in explaining luck to people who only listened for shortcuts. Still, one question followed him everywhere. "Do you regret selling?" Caleb always paused before answering. "No," he finally learned to say, "because I didn't lose her. I finished my part." Months passed. Slate went on to bigger tracks, brighter lights, deeper competition. Caleb followed from a distance, sometimes watching replays late at night, sometimes not watching at all. He didn't need proof anymore. He'd already seen it. One afternoon, a letter arrived. No return address, just his name. Inside was a photo. Slate in motion. Mid-stride, perfect alignment. A moment frozen that captured exactly what Caleb had noticed in that quiet paddock long ago. On the back, a single sentence was written. You were right not to look away. Caleb folded the photo carefully and placed it in the drawer with his old notebook, the one that still held the first measurements, the first doubts, the first risks. That night he stood at the edge of the field as the sun dropped low, casting long shadows across the land. The same land he'd almost lost. The same land that had witnessed a $1 decision rewrite everything. Caleb understood something then. Most people wait for certainty before they move. But the people who change their lives? They move when something quiet tells them to raise their hand, even when the world is laughing. And sometimes that single motion is worth $1 million. Caleb didn't become famous. That surprised people more than the money ever did. After the sale, invitations came in waves, panels, podcasts, offers to tell the story right. He declined almost all of them. Not out of pride, out of instinct. He'd learned that attention behaved like weather. Too much of it, and things broke. Instead, Caleb did something quieter. He rebuilt, not just the ranch, the rhythm of his days. He woke before dawn because he wanted to, not because panic dragged him out of bed. Coffee tasted different when it wasn't followed by dread. Work had shape again, purpose. He hired 2 local hands, men who'd been struggling the same way he once had, and paid them on time without flinching. The ranch breathed. One afternoon, a neighbor stopped by. Same man who'd laughed at the auction. Same tone, softened now. He leaned on the fence and watched Caleb work. "Never thought that horse would turn out like that," the man said. Caleb didn't look up. "Neither did I." "But you bought her." Caleb paused, then nodded. "Yeah, I did." The man hesitated. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't?" Caleb considered the question longer than expected. He thought about the auction yard, the laughter, the moment his hand rose before his mind could stop it. "She'd have disappeared," he said finally. "Same as a lot of things do." That answer stayed with him. Over time, people started asking different questions. Younger ranchers, men burned out, running on thin margins and thinner hope. They didn't ask about money. They asked about judgment. "How did you know?" one asked. Caleb shook his head every time. "I didn't. I just noticed." He started a small fund quietly. Nothing public, no announcements. He bought animals no one wanted, helped others do the same. Not chasing miracles, just giving time where it was cheapest. Once in a while, something worked. Most times it didn't. And that was fine. Years later, Slate won another major race, bigger than the first. Caleb heard about it from a neighbor who shouted the news across the field. He smiled, nodded, then went back to fixing a gate that didn't really need fixing. Because the truth was this: the race that mattered most had already been run. It happened in a dusty yard, under a wide sky, when a tired farmer lifted his hand for $1 while everyone else looked away. And that moment didn't just make him a millionaire. It made him someone who trusted the quiet voice that said, "This matters," even when nothing else did. Years later, people still tried to reduce it to a moment. They asked about the auction, the dollar, the race. They wanted the shortcut version, the part where luck did all the work. Caleb learned to recognize that look, the one that searched his face for permission to believe in miracles without paying attention. He never gave them what they wanted, because the truth was slower. The truth was 100 small decisions no one filmed, choosing patience over panic, choosing restraint over excitement, choosing to protect something fragile when selling it early would have been easier. The dollar hadn't changed his life. The discipline afterward had. One fall morning, Caleb stood at the edge of the ranch with a young rancher named Owen, barely out of his 20s, hands shoved deep into borrowed gloves. Owen had lost 3 animals that year. Bad weather, bad timing, bad luck, according to everyone else. "There's an auction next week," Owen said quietly. "Probably shouldn't go." Caleb studied the land before answering. "Go if you're willing to see what others don't." Owen frowned. "And if I don't? Then don't raise your hand." That was the lesson. Not buy everything. Not chase stories. Just notice. That winter, Caleb received one more letter. No logo, no publicity request, just a short note from Slate's new team, written by someone who clearly understood restraint. "She's still efficient," it read. "Still calm. Still exactly what you saw." Caleb folded the letter and placed it beside the photo. He didn't need updates anymore. Knowing she remained herself was enough. The ranch settled into a steady rhythm after that. Seasons came and went without crisis. Caleb planted trees where fences used to be patched. He taught the local kids how to mend wire, how to read weather, how to tell when an animal was tired instead of stubborn. Sometimes they asked him about the money. He told them it solved problems. It didn't answer questions. On the anniversary of the auction, Caleb drove past the old yard. It looked smaller than he remembered. Same dust, same gate, different feeling. He didn't stop. There was nothing left to collect there, because the real value had never been the filly. It was the moment he didn't turn away, and that moment was still available to anyone willing to slow down long enough to notice it.